The streetlight flickered over cracked asphalt, casting intermittent shadows across the empty intersection. Marcus Lewis gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening, the hum of his car radio barely masking the distant wail of a siren. He had been driving home from the evening broadcast, another long shift delivering news the city often ignored. The air smelled of wet concrete and exhaust, sharp and metallic. A sudden spotlight swept across his windshield. The patrol car's engine roared behind him. A voice, cold and clipped, crackled through the speaker. "License and registration. Pull over." Marcus's pulse accelerated. He had been stopped before, yes, but never like this. The officer's face, illuminated in the harsh white light, was tight with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Evening, sir," the officer said. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, finally shook his head. The officer leaned closer, the flashlight jabbing at Marcus's face. "I think you do," he said, and the smirk widened, teeth glinting. A man walking past glanced over, then hurried on. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the low, simmering anger of being targeted for the color of his skin rather than his actions. "I'm just going home," Marcus said, voice measured but taut. "You think being on TV makes you better than everyone else?" The words struck like a knife. Before he could respond, the officer's hand moved toward the door handle. Marcus realized in a heartbeat that tonight would not end at home. It would end in the station, under lights that burned truth and power equally, and he would be forced to confront not just the officer's hatred, but the system enabling it. He swallowed hard. The car door clicked. Silence fell. Then the officer barked, "Step out." Marcus Lewis eased his car to the curb as the patrol car's flashing lights painted the hood in jagged red and blue. The hum of the city dimmed behind him, replaced by the officer's engine growl and the distant click of a crosswalk signal. His hands gripped the steering wheel, each knuckle stark against the leather. "License and registration," a voice barked from the patrol speaker. Marcus exhaled slowly. He had encountered officers before, stops that lasted minutes, scans of ID and papers, but something about tonight felt different. The spotlight stabbing through the windshield made his eyes water. He saw the officer now, a white man in his 40s with a tight jaw and smirk that carried judgment, hovering over the car like a hawk. "Evening," Marcus said. His voice was even careful. "Am I being pulled over for something specific?" The officer leaned in, flashlight jabbing at Marcus's face. "You think you're too good for the law?" Marcus froze. "I don't understand. You drive like you own the street. TV guy thinks he's better than everyone else." The words were sharp, intentional. Marcus's stomach twisted. He thought of his evening broadcast, the careful, neutral voice he used to relay stories. The officer didn't see the facts, the professionalism. He saw a black man in a car, driving after dark, his success threatening. "I'm just driving home," Marcus said, steady now, each word measured. "I haven't broken any laws." The officer's smirk widened. "That's for me to decide." A pedestrian glanced over, hesitated, then hurried along. The street was quiet except for the occasional honk in the distance. Marcus's mind raced, cataloging the escalation. Years of minor humiliations, dismissals, and assumptions condensed into a single, stifling moment. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus's chest tightened. He knew the law, his rights, the protocols. He also knew the officer's body language, the power radiating from the uniform and the badge. The air smelled of exhaust, damp concrete, and tension. He opened the door, the metal cold under his palm. The officer circled to the driver's side. His tone had sharpened, authority brimming with unearned confidence. "License. Now." Marcus handed it over. He met the officer's eyes, trying to measure rationality, trying to anchor himself. The officer's gaze didn't waver, not in fairness, but in dominance. "I'm just asking questions," Daniel said. His smirk lingered, a quiet weapon. "Don't make this difficult." Marcus could feel the eyes of the city outside the car. Windows glinted in the distance, unaware, indifferent. He imagined the report that would be written, the internal justification he would fabricate. Each second stretched. The officer tapped the side of the car, impatient, exuding control. Marcus's pulse thrummed in his ears. He remembered past stops, each detail like a scar, but he also remembered his voice on the air, the facts he controlled, the power of truth he wielded outside this moment. The officer's hand hovered near the door handle. Marcus's mind calculated. Any misstep could escalate. Any sound could be misinterpreted. Danielle's voice cut through the quiet. "Step out. Now." Marcus's hand gripped the door. The air smelled metallic. His heartbeat echoed in his ears. He was about to step into a space where law and prejudice collided, and the outcome was unknown. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed overhead, cold and unforgiving. Marcus Lewis walked forward, cuffed but still composed, the metal pressing against his wrists like a reminder of the power imbalance at play. Officer Daniels led him through narrow corridors, the faint smell of disinfectant and stale coffee mixing with a low murmur of radios. "Name?" a booking officer asked without looking up from the computer. "Marcus Lewis," he replied. His voice carried calm, though his chest tightened. "Date of birth." He recited it. Each question was mechanical, sterile, a veneer of procedure masking the subtle aggression beneath. The officer typed, glanced at him, then shook his head slightly as if Marcus's presence alone were an inconvenience. Daniels hovered nearby, a smirk tugging at his lips, silent but commanding. The tension in the room was thick, palpable. Marcus caught the eyes of other detainees, none speaking, each aware of the microaggressions and silent hierarchies at work. "You've been stopped before?" Daniels asked casually, voice low, more observation than inquiry. "Yes," Marcus said, steady. "But this stop is unjustified." Danielle's smirk widened. "That's for me to decide." Marcus remained silent, cataloging everything. The dismissive tone of the booking officer, the bureaucratic walls that insulated authority from accountability, the small gestures of power, the pat on the shoulder, the shuffle of papers, the click of handcuffs being checked. Each movement a reminder of the system, designed to intimidate and maintain control. "Vehicle search completed," the booking officer announced. "No violations." Daniels chuckled softly. "Funny how things work out." Marcus felt a surge of anger but contained it. Words could be used against him here. He observed the patterns. The officer's casual domination, the compliance of the staff, the lack of oversight. He recognized the systemic bias threading through every interaction, every assumption, every word left unspoken. A young officer approached with a clipboard. "You'll need to wait here. Processing will take a while." Marcus nodded, lowering himself onto the hard bench. The room smelled of bleach and anxiety. He glanced around. A man muttering under his breath, a woman trying to make herself small, an older man staring at the floor. All of them caught in the machinery of authority. Daniels leaned against the wall, arms crossed, observing. Marcus's mind raced, replaying the incident on the street, the officer's words, the casual mockery. Each moment had escalated like a ripple through a pond of power and prejudice. A flashback crept in. Other stops, dismissals, the subtle racism coded in language and behavior. The humiliation, the indifference, the microaggressions layered one atop another, forming a silent dossier of injustice that no one had yet acknowledged. "Do you know why you're really here?" Daniels asked, voice deceptively light. Marcus looked up sharply. "You made it sound like it's your decision," he said, measured, restrained. Daniels chuckled. "Exactly. You think being on TV shields you. That badge doesn't care about your job, your reputation. Step inside reality." Marcus's stomach knotted. He realized Daniels wasn't just enforcing the law. He was exercising personal power unchecked, leaning on systemic support, using every tool the precinct offered to maintain dominance. His instincts screamed caution. His principles screamed defiance. He scanned the room, noting cameras, officers, other detainees. Each could be a witness, a participant, or a silent accomplice. Marcus mentally documented the layout, the patterns, the potential leverage points. Knowledge was his only protection. "All right," Daniel said, straightening. "Let's make this official." Marcus exhaled slowly, steeling himself. The line between procedure and prejudice had blurred. He was aware now of the stakes. This wasn't just about tonight, the stop, or the false violation. It was about how the system weaponized authority, and how one man's bias could ripple outward, affecting perception, reputation, and truth itself. The door clicked behind him as another officer led him into the booking room proper. Marcus understood. Every second here mattered. Every word, gesture, and glance was part of a story he had to survive, observe, and eventually expose. The newsroom smelled of coffee, printer toner, and the faint tang of tension that seemed to settle over every shift. Marcus Lewis stepped through the sliding glass doors, badge of professionalism intact, though his heart still thrummed from the precinct experience. His colleagues glanced up briefly, murmurs passing like currents through the air, but none approached. Marcus, his producer Karen, called, voice tight, formal. "We need to talk before you go on air." He followed her into the small office, shutting the door against the hum of the newsroom. "What's going on?" he asked. Karen's eyes flicked to the floor before returning to his. "You've been stopped. There's already chatter online." Marcus's chest tightened. "Online? How? I haven't even left the station yet." "Someone posted your mugshot from the precinct," Karen said, biting her lip. "It's trending. People are commenting." He felt a cold rush. "It's false. I wasn't arrested for anything." Karen's expression was carefully neutral. "I know, Marcus. But the public doesn't. And the higher-ups want you to present the story neutrally, as if—" She paused. "As if nothing happened to you personally." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "Neutral. They want me to ignore reality while it affects me directly." Karen sighed. "It's corporate policy. We can't show bias. You're a reporter, not the story." He leaned against the edge of the desk, the fluorescent light reflecting off his dark skin like a spotlight on his frustration. "They don't see the system, Karen. They see me, the man they think failed, and they expect me to perform as if the injustice isn't happening." Karen swallowed. "It's complicated." "Complicated doesn't cover being humiliated, misrepresented, and targeted because of the color of my skin," Marcus said, voice tight. "It doesn't cover Daniels using the system to assert personal power while everyone else looks away." Her silence confirmed what he already knew. Inside institutions, even those purporting to report truth, caution often outweighed justice. Neutrality was safety. The truth was inconvenient. A notification beeped on his phone. Marcus glanced down. A thread on social media, comments piling up. Speculation, ridicule, subtle microaggressions hidden behind emojis and sarcasm. The narrative had already formed, without input, without evidence. "Are you going to broadcast tonight?" Karen asked. Marcus swallowed. "I will. But I will also make a record. Everything. This isn't just a story for me. It's evidence." She nodded, wary. "Be careful. The higher-ups. They're sensitive. You can't just challenge the system publicly." He turned toward the studio, the familiar lights and cameras a sharp contrast to the precinct's harsh fluorescence. Here he had control, a stage for truth. Outside, the world had assumed a story that fit its biases. In the green room, he rehearsed the segment silently. He focused on facts, tone neutral, face composed. Yet each line carried weight, an undercurrent of personal vindication and suppressed fury. He knew colleagues would interpret his voice, watch his gestures, and some would misread them, some would cheer silently, some would criticize for overstepping boundaries. A junior reporter approached. "Marcus, some people are saying you You shouldn't report this. That you're too involved. He fixed the young man with a calm gaze. Being involved doesn't mean being silent. Remember that. Facts aren't neutral when filtered through prejudice. They need clarity, even if it makes people uncomfortable. The studio director called them to their positions. Cameras whirred, lights blazed, and Marcus took his place, composure intact but mind racing. The segment opened, and his voice carried through the air, steady but purposeful. A rival reporter smirked from across the floor. Careful, Marcus. Someone leaked your mugshot. Word is, it's already painting a story of criminality. You sure you want to risk looking biased? Marcus's jaw tightened. He met the gaze unflinching. I report facts. That's the only way to fight narratives built on prejudice. Behind the lens, the cameras captured his image. A black man standing firm in the face of falsehoods, the system, and the whispers of institutionalized skepticism. Outside the studio, the social media storm continued to swell, uncontrolled and untamed. Marcus realized the precariousness of truth in a world that wanted stories packaged neatly, sanitized, and stripped of context. Every word he spoke now would carry consequences, every gesture a signal, every pause a possible weapon for others' interpretations. And yet he would not be silenced. By the next morning, the city had already digested the narrative it wanted to believe. Marcus Lewis's mugshot circulated through social media feeds, twisted captions mocking his arrest. Algorithms favored outrage, and the public devoured it, indifferent to the truth. The comments section was a battlefield. Some cruel, some patronizing, many assuming guilt based on nothing but skin color and context. Marcus scrolled through the posts at home, coffee cooling in his hand. Each comment struck like a needle, mocking, accusatory, condescending. His wife, Angela, sat across from him, silent, watching his hands tremble slightly over the keyboard. She had seen this before. The endless cycle of prejudice, the invisible weight that settled on his shoulders because he dared to exist visibly and professionally. They're celebrating him, Marcus, Angela said softly. She nodded toward a trending news story praising Danielle's efficient handling of the stop. Her eyes were steady but pained. They're applauding someone for doing exactly what we know is wrong. Marcus pressed his lips together, trying to block the rising fury. He typed a reply to one particularly venomous post, only to delete it. Public argument would not serve him. Exposure through the proper channels would. He could feel the social humiliation pressing down, the subtle condescension in every headline, the distortion in the narrative that painted him as the offender. At the station, whispers followed him. Colleagues who once nodded in passing now gave polite, distant smiles. The newsroom's energy had shifted, subtle but palpable. One intern, nervously clutching her notebook, asked, "Marcus, are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said, voice steady, but his mind catalogued every reaction. Each glance, each murmur, each hesitant step was a small reminder of how the system amplified bias and minimized truth. He knew Daniels was quietly celebrated within the precinct. Internal emails, circulating behind closed doors, praised his professionalism in handling a potentially volatile situation. Marcus imagined Daniels walking the precinct halls, head high, shielded by protocol and unchecked authority, the machinery of bureaucracy protecting his arrogance. Marcus's phone buzzed. A friend from the civil rights community sent a message. "Document everything. This is systemic." Marcus replied with a simple acknowledgement. He had already begun mentally archiving every interaction, every news clip, every social media post. Evidence would be his armor, even as public perception tried to break him. The city's social media storm collided with the newsroom's internal politics. His producer reminded him again to maintain neutrality in his reporting. "You're the story, but don't become the activist. We can't risk editorial backlash." Marcus nodded, hiding the resentment that curled in his stomach. He understood the delicate dance. Speak truth, remain professional, and navigate a world that would weaponize his every response. Later that day, Marcus met with a small group of friends at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. Conversation was careful at first. "You're being painted as something you're not," one friend said, voice low. "People believe the wrong story, and it spreads faster than facts." "I know," Marcus said. He stared into his coffee, swirling the dark liquid like he was swirling the city's injustice into a readable form. "But the system doesn't care. It's the optics, not the truth, that matter. Daniels knows that. The precinct knows that. And right now, everyone else is playing along." A young activist leaned forward. "What about taking it public? Evidence, recordings, witnesses?" Marcus met her gaze evenly. "Everything is being documented. But exposure has to be strategic. Impulsive action will get twisted, used against me." He thought of the officer's casual smirk, the ease with which Daniels manipulated authority. Marcus realized the city had already judged him, and only meticulous, deliberate action could counteract the false narrative. That night, as Marcus returned home, the social humiliation felt heavier. Every glance from strangers seemed loaded. Every car behind him might carry judgment. He imagined Daniels celebrating the perceived lesson he had delivered. The officer's power wasn't just physical. It was amplified by silence, by complicity, by public apathy. Marcus sat in the darkened living room, eyes on the ceiling, replaying every detail. The injustice was systemic, pervasive, and merciless. But beneath the humiliation, beneath the public misrepresentation, a plan was forming. Daniels might have thought he won tonight, but Marcus knew that evidence, truth, and persistence could dismantle even the most fortified arrogance. The night stretched long and quiet, and Marcus felt the weight of both the system and his own resolve pressing against him. The cliffhanger arrived in a single ping, a notification from a rival reporter, cryptic and loaded. "You might want to see this before it goes live. Could be interesting." Marcus Lewis arrived at his lawyer's office, the late morning sun casting sharp shadows across the glass facade. Civil rights attorney Angela Moreno greeted him with a firm handshake, her expression a mix of concern and determination. Marcus didn't need small talk. Every step he had taken since the stop had been deliberate, and now he was prepared to translate indignation into strategy. "Show me everything," Moreno said, leading him into a cluttered office lined with books on constitutional law and civil rights precedents. Marcus laid out his documentation, time-stamped photos of his car, notes on the officer's words, the booking log, screenshots of social media, and a transcript of the newsroom discussion regarding his coverage. Moreno scanned it quickly, nodding, her eyes narrowing at inconsistencies. "They falsified reports," she said finally. "Multiple entries contradict your account. We can prove Daniels knowingly misrepresented the situation." Marcus felt a flicker of hope. "And the precinct? They'll resist internally. Standard procedure protects officers, but if we expose discrepancies, we force accountability. Evidence is your shield." They discussed the systematic patterns: officers stopping black drivers disproportionately, internal communications celebrating minor incidents as successes, and the public's readiness to accept negative narratives based on race. Moreno emphasized the need for meticulous documentation, credible witnesses, and strategic timing. Over the next few days, Marcus returned to the scene, reviewing the intersection, noting streetlight positions, and cross-referencing timing with his dashcam. Dialogue with bystanders revealed subtle observations: cars that passed too quickly, pedestrians who saw but didn't intervene, neighbors accustomed to being invisible in the eyes of law enforcement. Each conversation highlighted systemic indifference. At the precinct, Marcus filed formal complaints, navigating bureaucratic hurdles, each form signed and countersigned by indifferent clerks. Daniels's colleagues offered polite smiles, masking complicity. One officer muttered, "He'll be fine. It's just procedure." Marcus noted each word. Each gesture, each tone became part of the case he was building. The social media storm continued to swirl. Marcus compiled screenshots, noting timestamps, commenters, and algorithmic patterns of amplification. Every post, every rumor, every distorted image was evidence of the public machinery that enabled Danielle's narrative. During a consultation with Moreno, Marcus debated strategy. "We need more than evidence of the stop," he said. Danielle's history, internal reports, his attitude toward other drivers. "We need a pattern." Moreno nodded. "Exactly. Patterns demonstrate systemic abuse. One incident looks isolated. Multiple incidents show a strategy, or negligence. Either way, it strengthens your case." Marcus also considered the newsroom. He recorded internal communications about the leaked mugshot and observed colleagues' reactions. Conversations with producers, reporters, and editors revealed cautious complicity. Concern for the station's reputation outweighed concern for truth. Dialogue captured coded language. "Don't make it personal. Keep it professional. Balance the optics." One evening, reviewing footage from the night of the stop, Marcus noticed subtle gestures Daniels had made. A tap of the patrol car window, the way he circled the vehicle, the way he leaned into the conversation with exaggerated authority. He realized that small actions, amplified by authority and perceived bias, created a cascade effect that manipulated perception. Moreno emphasized caution. "Exposure without precision can backfire. Daniels will resist. He has institutional backing. But we have facts. That's leverage. Timing is everything." Marcus left the office late, city lights reflecting off wet pavement. He was cataloging steps, witnesses, evidence, and potential risks. Each pedestrian glance, each car honk, each flicker of streetlight could serve as a record if noted correctly. His phone buzzed. A civil rights journalist had contacted him, asking for a detailed account of the night's events. Marcus hesitated, then drafted a meticulous, factual report, stripping emotion from the narrative but preserving the moral weight. Dialogue between himself and the journalist emphasized clarity and precision, avoiding sensationalism while making systemic bias visible. Days later, he discovered preliminary internal records suggesting Daniels had falsified reports in previous stops, covering a pattern of bias. The files were buried in the system, overlooked by clerks who accepted authority without question. Marcus realized the depth of what he was up against, a network of procedural shielding that normalized prejudice. He and Moreno planned next steps, filing formal complaints, documenting further encounters, and coordinating selective public disclosure to force accountability. Dialogue became strategy, each word weighed for impact and risk. The system's opacity meant that meticulous, evidence-based exposure was the only way forward. By the week's end, Marcus sat in his apartment, files spread across the table. The social humiliation still stung, but now it had direction. Every email, transcript, and recording became ammunition, a weapon of precision against systemic injustice. He understood fully that victory would not erase trauma. It would only illuminate truth and demand accountability. A final notification pinged from the journalist. "Daniels has a reputation. People are noticing. This could break wide open if we handle it right." Marcus exhaled. The investigation was no longer passive observation. It was a calculated confrontation with power, bias, and systemic oppression. And for the first time he felt he could win, not through brute force, but through methodical exposure and relentless documentation. Marcus Lewis sat in the dim corner of the cafe, laptop open, coffee cooling beside him. The din of midday chatter created a background hum, but he noticed everything. The barista's fleeting glance, the elderly couple whispering, the door swinging open and shut. Every observation was data, every detail potentially relevant. He had spent days documenting Danielle's actions, cross-referencing precinct reports, dashcam footage, social media posts, and eyewitness statements. Patterns had emerged. Danielle's stops, his selective targeting, and the casual arrogance of his internal communications. Marcus had begun to understand not just the man but the system enabling him. His phone buzzed. An anonymous tip. Daniels has been talking off-duty at the local diner. Admits how he targets drivers. Might be worth listening in. Marcus considered the risk. Recording an officer without consent carried potential consequences, but Daniels had already weaponized the system. Marcus leaned back, fingers steepled. Strategic exposure required evidence, and tonight, opportunity aligned with diligence. The diner was a short drive away. Marcus parked across the street, observing through the rain-specked window. Daniels sat with two colleagues, laughing loudly, gesturing at the street outside as if sharing a private joke. Marcus adjusted the phone in his jacket pocket, recording discreetly, capturing every word and gesture. "Don't worry, it's easy," Daniels was saying. "Just pull them over. Look threatening. Ask for license. People see the badge and fold. Works every time." One colleague laughed. "No one questions it." Daniels leaned back, smirk widening. "Not unless they're on TV. And even then it's rare. Systems on our side. Paperwork covers everything." Marcus felt his pulse spike. Every word was confirmation of intent, pattern, and systemic exploitation. He kept recording, noting not just the dialogue but body language. The casual arrogance, the confident gestures, the lack of awareness that he was being documented. The conversation shifted to Daniels's personal opinions about black drivers, the coded language clear to anyone paying attention. Marcus's stomach tightened, anger simmering beneath a mask of calm. Every laugh, every dismissive wave of the hand, was evidence. The risk was palpable. One wrong move and he could be exposed, accused, or worse. But Marcus had prepared meticulously. Public visibility, legal counsel, and redundancy in recordings ensured a layer of protection. He recorded for 10 minutes, then slipped back to his car, heart hammering but mind focused. Back at home, he transcribed the recording, time-stamped each admission, and compared it against the official precinct reports. The gaps were glaring. Admissions of intentional targeting, procedural manipulation, and casual disregard for accountability. Marcus realized this single piece of evidence could dismantle Daniels's credibility if presented carefully. He discussed next steps with Moreno via encrypted messages. "We need to verify timestamps, cross-reference witnesses, and prepare for pushback," she advised. "Daniels will claim entrapment, privacy violation, anything to discredit you." Marcus nodded. Strategy was critical. The power dynamic was shifting, but only if he proceeded with precision. He drafted a sequence of actions: internal complaint submission, selective media exposure, social media documentation, legal filings, and public transparency. Every move calculated to force accountability without inviting undue retaliation. That evening, Daniels appeared in local news clips, talking about community policing and professional standards. Marcus felt a surge of irony. A man who admitted manipulating law for personal bias was now celebrated publicly for integrity. He knew exposure would have to pierce the polished facade. He also reached out to eyewitnesses from prior stops. Each conversation revealed subtle confirmations of Daniels's behavior. Stops without cause, intimidation, selective enforcement. Dialogue captured fear, hesitation, and subtle complicity, another layer reinforcing the systemic issue. Marcus's social media presence, initially a source of public humiliation, now became a tool. He prepared carefully worded posts detailing his own experience, juxtaposed with documentation and evidence of Daniels's bias. He avoided emotional overstatement, favoring precise factual narration, letting the evidence speak for itself. Late at night, Marcus reviewed the recording again. Daniels's words were clear, unfiltered, and damning. The casual arrogance that had intimidated him on the street was now trapped in digital permanence. Marcus realized the officer's power relied on secrecy, manipulation, and public compliance. Exposure stripped that away. The final hurdle, timing. Released too early, and the evidence could be twisted. Wait too long and opportunity would fade. Marcus set a deliberate schedule, coordinating with Moreno, trusted colleagues, and selective media contacts. The next days would be a careful execution of justice, exposing bias without enabling retaliation. He leaned back in the chair, exhausted but resolute. The officer's power was no longer abstract. It was visible, documented, and vulnerable. Marcus understood the moral weight. Systemic bias required both courage and precision to challenge, and victory would demand persistence, patience, and unwavering adherence to evidence. As he closed his laptop, a notification blinked on his phone. A message from an unknown number. "He knows someone's recording. Be careful." Marcus exhaled slowly, mind already recalibrating. Exposure was imminent. Danielle's arrogance had blinded him, but it could not withstand methodical, documented truth. The game had shifted. The predator had become prey in the arena of accountability. The newsroom buzzed with controlled chaos. Marcus Lewis sat at his desk, monitoring multiple screens. Social media feeds, internal communications, and the live broadcast queue. The recordings from Daniels were now verified and time-stamped. Every word, every gesture, meticulously documented. The evidence was indisputable, and the moment for exposure was imminent. A producer approached cautiously. "Marcus, are you ready?" The higher-ups approved the release strategy. He nodded. "We go live in 30 minutes. Stick to facts. No hyperbole." Across the city, news alerts began pinging, teasing the upcoming story. Headlines framed the segment carefully. Allegations of racial bias surface against Officer Daniels. The phrasing was precise, designed to prevent sensationalism while ensuring visibility. Marcus knew perception mattered as much as truth. Framing the narrative correctly was essential. In the green room, he rehearsed key points silently. His script emphasized documented facts, cross-referenced incidents, and the systemic patterns revealed by his investigation. Every sentence carried moral weight, and every pause was deliberate. The cameras rolled. Marcus's voice was calm, authoritative, measured. "Our city's law enforcement system has been challenged by a pattern of bias and misconduct. Evidence collected over several months shows Officer Daniels engaging in stops targeting specific communities, often without cause. Recorded admissions corroborate repeated misconduct, highlighting systemic issues that require accountability." On-screen graphics displayed excerpts from reports, transcripts of the off-duty recording, and comparative statistics of stops across neighborhoods. The newsroom was tense, every staff member aware of the stakes. Outside, the city responded almost instantly. Social media erupted, splitting public opinion. Some praised the exposure, others attacked Marcus's credibility, citing loyalty to law enforcement or dismissing his findings as anecdotal. Dialogue among commentators, journalists, and citizens mirrored the societal tension Marcus had experienced firsthand. Skepticism, bias, and moral debate colliding in real time. A rival reporter called the newsroom, voice clipped. "Marcus, your segment is stirring controversy. Are you prepared for fallout?" "I am," Marcus replied. "Facts don't rely on popularity. They rely on accuracy and documentation." Inside the newsroom, colleagues watched in silence. Some admiration flickered in their eyes, some envy. The cameras caught it all. A black man standing firmly against systemic abuse. His professionalism intact. His moral authority undeniable. Later, Marcus joined a conference call with civil rights organizations, media contacts, and legal counsel. Each participant weighed the release strategy, discussed amplification, and prepared for backlash. Dialogue was precise, focused on facts, consequences, and mitigation of risk. Marcus realized that systemic exposure required collaboration, not solo heroism. Networks of credibility mattered as much as evidence itself. The city's response escalated rapidly. Daniels, previously confident, was now under scrutiny. Internal affairs began preliminary inquiries. Community leaders demanded accountability. Social media amplified the recordings, dissecting gestures, phrases, and documented bias. Public discourse shifted, and the power Daniels had wielded so casually began eroding under relentless factual pressure. Marcus received a call from Moreno. "He's asking for a lawyer. Internal affairs are moving faster than expected. You did this correctly. Timing and documentation made the difference." He exhaled, but relief was tempered by caution. Exposure did not eliminate the trauma, nor did it erase the prior humiliation. The systemic imbalance remained, though for a moment, accountability had gained ground. Meanwhile, Daniels attempted countermeasures, leaked personal statements, informal briefings to sympathetic colleagues, and subtle attempts to undermine Marcus's credibility. Each action was predictable, and Marcus anticipated them, prepared responses ready, evidence organized. Dialogue with his legal team focused on countering narrative manipulation while maintaining factual authority. At home, Marcus reflected on the week's escalation. The city had seen the system's fragility exposed. The officer's previously unchecked power was now under scrutiny, and public opinion, guided by evidence, had begun to recalibrate. Yet Marcus acknowledged the emotional toll. Sleepless nights, constant vigilance, and the lingering humiliation of initial false narratives. Exposure was not catharsis. It was responsibility. The social media storm continued, amplifying, dissecting, debating. Marcus carefully monitored, noting patterns. Supportive communities mobilizing, detractors questioning motives, journalists referencing documented facts. Dialogue from these interactions reinforced systemic awareness. Bias could be countered, but only through persistence, clarity, and unwavering adherence to truth. The final segment of the evening broadcast highlighted Daniels's upcoming internal affairs review. Marcus closed with measured reflection. Accountability is not automatic. Systems require vigilance, oversight, and courage from those willing to confront bias directly. This story is a reminder that authority must be monitored, and truth defended, even when inconvenient. In the quiet afterward, Marcus reviewed the footage. The documentation, the recordings, the corroborated witness accounts, all had culminated in undeniable exposure. The officer's smirk, once a symbol of unchecked arrogance, had been neutralized by methodical preparation and factual reporting. A final notification appeared on Marcus's phone, anonymous but urgent. "Daniels is planning something. Be alert." He leaned back, mentally cataloging contingencies. Exposure was achieved, but vigilance remained essential. The storm of public attention was just one phase. Legal proceedings, institutional pushback, and lingering societal bias demanded continuous strategy. Marcus understood the truth. The system had been exposed, but its inertia remained. Success was not absolution, it was leverage. He would continue to navigate the intersection of justice, accountability, and systemic scrutiny. Weeks later, Officer Daniels was suspended pending a formal internal affairs investigation. The precinct, previously a fortress of procedural protection, now faced scrutiny at every level. Marcus Lewis watched the announcements with a mixture of relief and caution. Justice had been set in motion, but the wounds, the social humiliation, the emotional fatigue, remained vivid. The newsroom had shifted subtly. Colleagues approached with respect tempered by awareness of risk. Some privately admitted they had underestimated Daniels's pattern of bias. The corporate caution that had restrained them before now gave way to cautious acknowledgement. The evidence Marcus had meticulously documented could not be ignored. Dialogue between Marcus and producers reflected measured reflection and careful strategy for follow-up stories, reinforcing the system's slow recalibration. Legal proceedings began. Marcus attended depositions, providing his recordings, witness statements, and logs. Each interaction emphasized precision. Daniels's defense attempted to discredit evidence, citing procedural technicalities and privacy concerns. Marcus's lawyer countered systematically, highlighting corroboration, pattern, and the intentionality revealed in Daniels's own words. Dialogue during these sessions revealed the tension between law, perception, and truth, with every statement carefully weighed. Public reaction evolved. Social media, once a crucible of humiliation, now amplified Marcus's vindication. Commentary shifted to discussions of systemic reform, procedural transparency, and the responsibilities of authority. Marcus monitored threads, noting shifts in dialogue, recognition, skepticism, calls for accountability, and debates over structural change. He understood that this visibility was both protective and psychologically taxing. Privately, Marcus reflected on the cost. Sleep remained irregular, conversations sometimes veered toward anger or mistrust, and the lingering humiliation of public misrepresentation persisted. Exposure had brought justice but not healing. He understood that confronting systemic bias exacted a personal toll, one not erased by legal or social outcomes. Dialogue with close friends and family focused on processing trauma, reinforcing boundaries, and maintaining resilience. Danielle's suspension became permanent after internal review confirmed repeated violations. The officer faced formal censure and potential civil litigation. The public acknowledgement of misconduct marked a rare instance of accountability, but Marcus recognized it as one step in a continuum of systemic reform. Dialogue with legal counsel emphasized cautious optimism. The case set precedent but did not resolve structural inequities overnight. Marcus returned to the studio to resume reporting. Each broadcast, each investigation, carried the weight of experience, precision, vigilance, and moral authority tempered by the scars of exposure. Colleagues approached with measured respect, but Marcus maintained professional distance, aware that visibility invited scrutiny and required constant strategic awareness. He revisited the cafe where he had recorded Daniel's. Sitting quietly, Marcus reflected on the journey. From humiliation at a roadside stop to meticulous documentation, strategic exposure, and eventual vindication. The city had witnessed both systemic abuse and the consequences of methodical accountability. The lesson was clear. Power unchecked could flourish, but with evidence, strategy, and moral clarity, it could be challenged effectively. Even with victory, Marcus acknowledged the emotional cost. Trust had been strained, confidence tested, and resilience taxed. Yet through dialogue with allies, careful documentation, and adherence to truth, he had navigated a path through injustice to accountability. The scars were permanent, but they carried lessons of strategy, observation, and steadfast commitment to principle. The city had changed in small but meaningful ways. Awareness of systemic bias grew, conversations about accountability multiplied, and institutions began the slow work of reform. Marcus understood that vigilance remained necessary. Exposure did not equate to resolution. Dialogue between citizens, media, and law enforcement continued, shaped by the precedent his experience had established. As evening fell, Marcus looked out over the city streets, neon reflections dancing on wet pavement. The badge of authority once wielded to intimidate now faced scrutiny. The system had been challenged, the officer held accountable, and the public informed. Yet Marcus carried forward the knowledge that true justice was ongoing, requiring vigilance, strategy, and unwavering adherence to truth. He exhaled, a measured release of tension. Accountability had been achieved, exposure complete, and systemic bias confronted, but the personal scars remained, a testament to the cost of challenging entrenched power and the resilience required to endure. The fallout from Danielle's suspension rippled across the city. Internal affairs circulated findings to precinct leadership, prompting policy reviews and mandatory bias training. Marcus Lewis monitored these developments closely, analyzing whether procedural promises translated into tangible change. His reporting now carried dual weight, documenting news while holding institutions accountable. Social media chatter evolved into substantive debate. Threads dissected stops, analyzed systemic patterns, and referenced Marcus's recordings as precedent. Dialogue between commenters revealed shifts in perception. Some admitted prior complacency, others debated the limits of accountability, and a few questioned whether justice had been thorough enough. Marcus catalogued it all, understanding the delicate balance between public awareness and societal polarization. At the newsroom, discussions shifted from his personal experience to broader systemic reform. Producers, once wary, now encouraged him to develop investigative segments examining patterns of racial profiling across precincts. Marcus coordinated interviews, reviewed case files, and consulted civil rights experts. Each segment emphasized procedural context, systemic patterns, and the lived experiences of targeted communities. Dialogue in these interviews was candid, revealing coded language, institutional oversight failures, and subtle microaggressions often ignored by the public. During one live broadcast, Marcus spoke directly about systemic issues. Accountability begins with transparency, evidence, and vigilance. One officer's bias may be exposed, but patterns persist. Our responsibility as journalists and citizens is to ensure that scrutiny does not lapse and that the system is not left unexamined. His voice was measured, authoritative, a mixture of personal insight and professional rigor. Outside the newsroom, community organizations mobilized, referencing Marcus's exposure of Daniels as a catalyst for advocacy. Meetings convened, strategies formed, and workshops designed to educate citizens on their rights during encounters with law enforcement. Marcus occasionally participated, providing testimony and insights, careful to maintain professionalism while illustrating systemic issues through factual narrative. The civil suit against Daniels progressed. Depositions, filings, and cross-examinations unfolded over weeks. Marcus's documentation proved pivotal. The off-duty recordings, witness statements, and social media archives formed an irrefutable chronology of misconduct. Dialogue in legal proceedings revealed how patterns of bias had been normalized, the casual arrogance Daniels displayed, and the systemic structures that shielded him from accountability prior to exposure. Marcus reflected on the human cost. Even as Daniels faced consequences, Marcus's own resilience was tested daily. The public scrutiny, social media vitriol, and newsroom dynamics had imposed stress, tension, and emotional fatigue. Dialogue with close allies emphasized the importance of self-care, processing trauma, and maintaining boundaries despite professional obligations. Within the precinct, subtle changes became apparent. Officers who previously dismissed bias now approached internal reviews with caution, aware of documentation, oversight, and potential public scrutiny. Procedural checklists were revised, training emphasized equitable enforcement, and supervisors monitored interactions more closely. Marcus recognized that systemic change was incremental. The ripple effect of one exposure could influence behavior, but true reform required sustained vigilance. During a community panel, a young activist asked Marcus, "Do you think it'll ever stop? Officers targeting certain people?" He replied evenly, voice measured but firm. "Not entirely. Systems have inertia. But exposure, accountability, and persistent observation create deterrence. Change is a process. One action, documented and verified, can influence culture, policy, and behavior, if we remain vigilant." The city, though imperfect, began to see the value of transparency. Media outlets adopted stricter standards for reporting on law enforcement encounters, emphasizing corroboration and systemic context. Conversations in public forums became less reactive, more analytical, rooted in evidence rather than conjecture. Marcus understood that narrative control had shifted slightly from unchecked authority to public accountability. Yet he also noted the subtleties that persisted: microaggressions in casual conversations, bias in subtle enforcement patterns, and the lingering cultural assumptions that facilitated Daniels's earlier behavior. Dialogue with colleagues reflected this awareness. Victory was partial, justice incomplete, and vigilance ongoing. Marcus returned home one evening, exhausted but alert. The recordings, the transcripts, the news reports, they had created ripples far beyond the initial roadside encounter. He knew Daniels's downfall was only one facet. True impact required continued observation, documentation, and education. He reflected quietly. Exposure alone did not cure systemic bias, but it illuminated it, offering an opportunity for accountability and reform. He glanced at the city skyline, neon lights shimmering on wet streets, a metaphor for the fragile but persistent reflection of truth in a world shaped by power and perception. The ripple effect was underway, subtle yet undeniable. Months later, the legal proceedings concluded. Officer Daniels faced formal termination, civil penalties, and public censure. Internal reviews recommended structural reforms, mandatory bias training, and oversight enhancements. The system, once protective of individual authority, now confronted accountability. Marcus Lewis observed the outcome with measured satisfaction. Victory was procedural, not emotional. At the newsroom, the atmosphere had shifted. Colleagues approached with professional respect, acknowledging Marcus's role in exposing systemic bias. Dialogue between reporters became more open, discussing institutional patterns and ways to investigate them responsibly. The focus had moved from individual humiliation to systemic awareness. Marcus's broadcasts now routinely highlighted civil rights issues, patterns of law enforcement behavior, and the necessity of evidence-based reporting. He met with civil rights organizations to evaluate the impact. Workshops, panels, and seminars referenced his case as a practical example of methodical documentation, strategic exposure, and the power of evidence over narrative. Dialogue emphasized the broader lesson. One individual, armed with diligence and truth, could challenge entrenched authority and catalyze institutional reflection. Yet Marcus understood the personal cost. Sleep patterns remained irregular, vigilance persistent. Public scrutiny had left residual anxiety. Dialogue with Angela focused on coping strategies, boundaries, and emotional resilience. He realized that systemic justice exacted ongoing personal effort. The scars of exposure were enduring, even as procedural justice was achieved. In private moments, Marcus reflected on the contrast between the roadside stop and the current landscape. Danielle's smirk, once emblematic of unchecked arrogance, had been replaced with procedural consequence. The recording, documentation, and meticulous strategy had neutralized personal power, but the underlying patterns of bias remained in pockets of the system. Awareness, vigilance, and methodical intervention remained essential. During a newsroom segment, Marcus emphasized the broader implications. Systems may appear immutable, but accountability and transparency matter. Patterns of bias can be identified, challenged, and addressed. Exposure is not a guarantee of universal justice, but it is a catalyst for reflection and reform. His tone was measured, authoritative, carrying the weight of experience without hubris. The city had begun subtle shifts. Community oversight boards grew more active. Public forums included structured dialogue on law enforcement practices, and social media conversations became increasingly informed by documented evidence rather than rumor. The ripple effect of Marcus's exposure of Daniels catalyzed awareness, even as systemic inertia persisted. Marcus continued documenting interactions, collecting evidence, and collaborating with legal and advocacy networks. He understood that change was incremental. One exposed officer did not transform an entire institution, but the precedent set a benchmark for accountability. Dialogue with colleagues and civil rights groups reinforced that structural change required persistence, vigilance, and adherence to fact-based advocacy. At home, Marcus allowed himself moments of quiet reflection. Angela's presence provided grounding, the anchor amid ongoing scrutiny. He acknowledged the emotional toll, recognizing that professional success and procedural justice did not erase personal trauma. The experience had sharpened his awareness, strengthened his resilience, and reinforced the necessity of meticulous documentation. In the newsroom, he reviewed upcoming stories, analyzing patterns of systemic injustice in various institutions. Each investigation applied the lessons learned: rigorous observation, precise documentation, corroboration, and methodical exposure. Dialogue with producers emphasized ethical reporting, factual integrity, and responsibility toward the public, reinforcing a professional framework resilient to manipulation. Finally, Marcus looked at the city skyline, lights reflecting on wet streets. Danielle's downfall was procedural proof of accountability, but the work of reform continued. Vigilance, evidence, and integrity remained the tools to challenge bias, and Marcus understood the moral responsibility to wield them consistently. He exhaled slowly, a measured acknowledgement of victory and cost. The system had been exposed, justice pursued, and accountability enforced, yet the scars remained, a permanent reminder of power, prejudice, and the persistence required to confront systemic injustice. Dialogue, documentation, and observation would continue. The city had shifted subtly, the ripple effect ongoing, but Marcus knew that vigilance was perpetual, and true justice demanded unwavering commitment. Months had passed since Danielle's suspension. Marcus Lewis continued his reporting with renewed focus, blending professional rigor with the lessons learned from personal exposure to systemic bias. Public awareness had increased, accountability structures were scrutinized, and procedural reforms were underway. Yet Marcus recognized that institutional inertia persisted. Systemic change was incremental, fragile, and ongoing. He returned often to the street where the initial stop occurred, a ritual of observation and reflection. Each glance, gesture, and interaction was catalogued mentally, a constant assessment of progress and persistent bias. Dialogue with colleagues, civil rights advocates, and citizens reinforced that vigilance was essential. The newsroom had evolved. Discussions about ethical reporting, evidence verification, and systemic patterns were routine. Marcus's influence extended beyond one story. His meticulous documentation and methodical exposure provided a framework for responsible investigative journalism. The ripple effect spread. Other reporters examined institutional bias, community leaders leveraged evidence for advocacy, and citizens engaged in informed dialogue about authority and accountability. At home, Marcus and Angela maintained grounding routines. Awareness of trauma and vigilance against emotional fatigue informed their lives. Even as procedural justice had been achieved, the personal scars remained: public humiliation, stress, and the psychological toll of confronting authority. Marcus understood that exposure was only part of justice. True reform required persistent observation, strategic intervention, and unwavering adherence to documented truth. His experiences had crystallized a principle: power unchecked thrives in silence, but methodical, evidence-driven accountability could shift institutions and public perception. As the city lights glimmered on wet streets, Marcus reflected on the journey. From a roadside stop that revealed personal and systemic vulnerability, through methodical documentation, public exposure, and procedural accountability. The system had been challenged, one officer's bias neutralized, and public awareness heightened. The ripple effect endured. Vigilance remained perpetual. Marcus knew systemic bias could re-emerge, authority could be misused, and narratives could be manipulated. Yet, armed with documentation, dialogue, and methodical strategy, he was prepared to confront injustice wherever it arose. The scars remained, but so did resilience, clarity, and commitment.